Have you ever wondered why some whiskeys taste smoky, some taste sweet, and others feel incredibly smooth? In just a few minutes, you will understand the difference between the most famous types of whiskey in the world. From Scotch and Irish whiskey to bourbon, Japanese whiskey, and even the mysterious world of single malt and blended whiskey. Welcome to Peter Health Tips, where today we break down all the major types of whiskey in the simplest way possible. Scotch whiskey. Scotch whiskey is often considered the classic standard of whiskey. To officially be called Scotch, the whiskey must be produced in Scotland and aged in oak barrels for at least 3 years. Most Scotch whiskeys are made from barley, and their color ranges from bright golden to deep amber, depending on the aging process. But interestingly, the flavor of Scotch whiskey is influenced more by the region where it is produced than by the length of aging. Two famous regions stand out: Speyside and Islay. Speyside whiskeys usually avoid using peat, which means they have very little smoky flavor. Instead, you will notice the natural sweetness of barley, along with notes of honey, apple, and vanilla from the oak barrels. Peat itself is a natural material made from plants that have decomposed underground for thousands of years. When burned during whiskey production, peat creates the smoky flavor that many whiskey lovers recognize. The region of Islay, on the other hand, is famous for heavy peat use. Because the island has more peat bogs than forests, distillers traditionally use peat in the production process. This results in whiskeys with bold, smoky aromas that can even remind some people of medicinal or iodine-like scents. There is also a simple trick to recognize many Scotch whiskeys. If the name includes the word Glen, it is very likely Scotch whiskey. In Scottish language, Glen means valley. In the past, illegal distillers hid deep in valleys to avoid taxes while producing whiskey near water sources. If you are trying Scotch whiskey for the first time, many experts recommend starting with a Speyside whiskey. One of the most famous examples is Glenfiddich, known for the deer symbol on the bottle. The name Glenfiddich actually means Valley of the Deer. Irish whiskey. Irish whiskey is produced in Ireland and is known for being smoother than many other whiskeys. One major difference between Irish and Scotch whiskey is the distillation process. Scotch whiskey is typically distilled twice, while Irish whiskey is distilled 3 times. That extra distillation removes more impurities and creates a lighter, smoother spirit. The flavor of Irish whiskey is often described as sweet, soft, and creamy with hints of vanilla, honey, and light fruit. Because it lacks the strong bite of some whiskeys, Irish whiskey is often recommended for beginners. Historically, Irish whiskey was once the most popular whiskey in the world. At its peak, Ireland had more than 400 distilleries. However, wars, trade conflicts, and the American Prohibition period caused the industry to collapse. During that time, Scotch whiskey took over the global market. Today, Irish whiskey is making a strong comeback and is one of the fastest growing whiskey categories. If you want a classic introduction, Jameson is one of the best known Irish whiskeys. It is smooth, balanced, and represents the traditional character of Irish whiskey. Irish whiskey also pairs well with coffee. Adding a small amount to coffee creates the famous Irish coffee, one of the easiest whiskey cocktails to make at home. Bourbon whiskey. Bourbon is a uniquely American style of whiskey. Unlike Scotch and Irish whiskey, which mainly use barley, bourbon is primarily made from corn. According to U.S. law, bourbon must contain at least 51% corn. Another important rule is that it must be aged in new charred oak barrels. Corn naturally gives bourbon a sweeter flavor, while the charred oak barrels add rich notes of vanilla, caramel, and toasted wood. Because of its sweetness and warmth, bourbon is often easier for beginners to enjoy than stronger Scotch whiskeys. There is also an interesting rule about bourbon barrels. In the United States, a barrel used to age bourbon can only be used once for bourbon production. After that, these barrels are often sold to distilleries around the world. In fact, many Scotch whiskeys are aged in used bourbon barrels, which adds additional flavor and helps reduce production costs. For beginners, Jim Beam is one of the most popular bourbon brands and is widely available. Another well-known bourbon is Maker's Mark, famous for its distinctive red wax seal that is still applied by hand. Rye whiskey. Rye whiskey is another American whiskey style. It is produced similarly to bourbon, But instead of corn being the main ingredient, rye whiskey must contain at least 51% rye grain. This small change creates a very different flavor profile. Corn produces sweetness, while rye grains generate spicy compounds during fermentation. As a result, rye whiskey is typically less sweet, drier, and noticeably spicier than bourbon. Historically, rye whiskey was actually the original American whiskey and was more popular than bourbon before Prohibition. However, when Prohibition ended, many consumers preferred lighter and sweeter drinks. This helped bourbon become more dominant, while rye whiskey faded in popularity. Today, rye whiskey is experiencing a revival thanks to classic cocktails like the Manhattan and Old Fashioned, which traditionally use rye whiskey. One well-known rye whiskey brand is Wild Turkey Rye, recognized for its bold, spicy character. Canadian whiskey. Canadian whiskey has a distinctive production method. Different grains such as corn, rye, barley, and wheat are often fermented and distilled separately before being blended together. This approach allows distillers to carefully control the balance of flavors. As a result, Canadian whiskey tends to be smooth, light, and easy to drink. It is not as smoky as Scotch and not as sweet as bourbon, but instead offers a clean and balanced taste. Canadian whiskey is also very popular in highball cocktails, where whiskey is mixed with soda water. During the American Prohibition era, Canadian whiskey experienced massive growth. Because alcohol production was banned in the United States, large amounts of Canadian whiskey were smuggled across the border. One famous Canadian whiskey is Crown Royal, known for its iconic purple velvet bag. The whiskey was originally created in 1939 to celebrate the visit of King George VI to Canada. Japanese whiskey. Japanese whiskey has gained global recognition for its balance and precision. Although whiskey originally came from Scotland, Japanese distillers developed their own unique style. The story begins in 1918 when a Japanese student named Masataka Taketsuru traveled to Scotland to study whiskey making. He carefully documented everything he learned, and his notes later became the foundation of the Japanese whiskey industry. After returning to Japan, he partnered with businessman Shinjiro Tori. Together, they built the Yamazaki Distillery in 1923, which became the beginning of Suntory. Later, Taketsuru left and founded another company called Nikka Whiskey. Today, Suntory and Nikka remain the two giants of Japanese whiskey. Japanese whiskey gained worldwide fame in 2015 when whiskey critic Jim Murray named Yamazaki the best whiskey in the world. Japanese whiskey is known for its delicate balance of fruit notes, soft oak, and gentle complexity. A popular bottle to try is Nikka from the Barrel, which combines high strength with remarkable balance. Single malt whiskey. Single malt whiskey is defined not by country but by production method. The word single does not mean the whiskey comes from a single barrel. Instead, it means the whiskey is produced at one single distillery. Single malt whiskey is made from malted barley and reflects the unique environment of that distillery, including its water, climate, and aging conditions. For many years, most distilleries produced whiskey mainly for blending companies rather than selling their own single malt bottles. Today, however, single malt whiskey has become extremely popular. Some of the most famous brands include Glenfiddich, Glenlivet, Macallan, Glenmorangie, and Balvenie. Blended whiskey. Blended whiskey is created by combining whiskeys from multiple distilleries. Famous examples include Johnnie Walker, Ballantine's, and Chivas Regal. The goal of blending is to produce a consistent flavor. This means that the bottle you drink today should taste the same as the bottle produced next year. Blended whiskey became globally popular in the 19th century when a disease destroyed many vineyards in France. This reduced the supply of cognac and brandy, which were widely consumed at the time. Scotch whiskey stepped in to fill the gap, but its strong flavor was unfamiliar to many drinkers. By blending whiskeys from different distilleries, producers created a smoother and more accessible product. Grain whiskey. Grain whiskey is produced using grains such as corn or wheat instead of malted barley. Its origin dates back to a time when high taxes on barley encouraged Scottish distillers to experiment with alternative grains. The production process is more efficient, but it also removes some of the complex flavors found in malt whiskey. As a result, grain whiskey tends to be lighter and smoother, with notes of vanilla, light grain, and creamy sweetness. Most grain whiskey is used as a base ingredient in blended whiskey. Even though it is rarely highlighted on its own, it plays an essential role in creating balanced whiskey blends. Now you know the major types of whiskey around the world. From smoky Scotch and smooth Irish whiskey to sweet bourbon and perfectly balanced Japanese whiskey, each style tells a different story. And this is exactly the kind of simple knowledge we love sharing here on Peter Health Tips. If you enjoy learning fascinating facts like this, make sure to follow Peter Health Tips for more quick and helpful knowledge.